Sewers are broadly hated in media, especially in games. We hate the samey, ugly level design, the uninspired enemy choices, and the constant threat of acquiring one or more debilitating diseases or poisons from the environment or from the creatures down there. I would broadly agree with these criticisms. None of the factors mentioned particularly interest me. Indeed, none of them, to me, are the interesting parts of a sewer system. What makes a city sewer an intriguing place to explore or feature in media is the massive amount of civil engineering, collaboration, and social good that a proper underground sewer system represents, as well as the practical realities of making something like this work. And these factors only get more interesting when we put them into a fantasy world, with magic, mutants, and monsters. So let's reimagine that classic sewer level into something a bit more interesting. First, we need to explore why a sewer might exist at all. Proper drainage and wastewater transport is a massive boon to society, and not just in the obvious way. Yes, people need to not live in the same place as their waste for health reasons. But it's nearly as important to choose a good place for said waste to go, be that irrigation or fertiliser or just into a river system. Equally, underground water supplying pipes aren't just used for moving feces. They supply drinking water, they drain floodplains, they funnel groundwater, they supply heating and cooling, and even sea defences. There are so many reasons why water needs to be transported within both urban and indeed rural environments where people live and work. Sometimes this even takes the form of above-ground pipes, aqueducts and pumps. In fact, in some environments you can get away with not having a single pipe underground. In fact, sometimes it can be detrimental to do so. So there are myriad reasons to build a water supply system. But an honest-to-goodness big old video gamey sewer? With space for maintenance workers to stand up in and mini-bosses. These are a rarer and more specialised beast. There are a few reasons for this. They're not needed everywhere. Not every settlement creates enough waste or needs enough water moving to require a cavernous sewer big enough to stand in. Indeed, most modern sewer systems are just a collection of relatively small pipes. And actually, so were most ancient sewer systems as well. Only a few civilizations have gone all in on big sewer tunnels, and they do this for a few fairly consistent reasons. To make a big sewer, you need a surplus of cheap or free human labour. You need experience building and maintaining tunnels, a large population, and a large amount of money to spend on public works, and a powerful regime in charge that can afford to tear down buildings and pull up streets en masse, causing short-term detriments for more robust long-term success. So the Romans, or Victorians, Napoleon's France, or the rapidly urbanising late 19th century America. To build a big, walkable around-in sewer system, the best option for underground work is really cheap human labour. To build a big, walkable fantasy sewer system, well, you no longer need that labour to be human, at the very least. I believe that fantasy societies may indeed have better reasons for building man-sized sewers than we have had in much of human history. Let's just look at my outline factors. Cheap or free labour. Even if stone-shaping magic doesn't exist, necromancy is a solid option for such dirty work. Or you could employ or enslave some weaker creatures like goblins to do the work. Creatures who tend to be found in tunnels and so will have experience in making them not collapse on themselves. For even smaller pipes, perhaps even fairies or pixies or the like. Some form of poop fairy could be very interesting from a folklore perspective as well. Alternatively, professionals like dwarfs may be a more expensive but more secure option. Perhaps they serve as overseers for larger workforces, although it must be noted that no matter who you are, digging through stone is hard. Humans using handheld tools can manage just a few feet in a working day. So if you can get magic of any kind to help, you maybe shortcut years of painstaking labour. Dungeons and Dragons, as an example, contains the spell Stone Shape, which can excavate a 5-foot wide tunnel for 5 feet of distance in an instant, for a mid to high magic cost. That's more work than a team of human labourers can do in 8 hours. Crazier options may include beings who eat stone, a classic example being a dune-style worm, which probably could excavate an entire sewer system in a matter of days, if well corralled and controlled, that is. Perhaps you could corral such a creature by digging physical manholes down from the surface at regular intervals and filling them with the worm's favourite food, making a kind of underground dot-to-dot that can be filled in by the creature, or, essentially a version of Snake. It's highly likely that fantasy sewers would look very, very different from place to place. From impressive but utilitarian dwarven vaulting, to rough-hewn goblinoid-style warrens, to magically smoothed and shaped stone, to giant worm tunnels. It depends on the available labour, resources, and risk. Now, most of our man-sized sewer examples also could pull double duty as storm drains, or protection against flooding. This is a very good reason to have a high volume tunnel, alongside the reason, of course, of a high volume of population and therefore a high volume of waste production. But would a magical society actually benefit from a huge sewer in the way that certain groups of historic peoples did? Famously, the Harry Potter canon included wizards vanishing away their own excrement for centuries, therefore having no need to do anything about indoor plumbing. Now, this is patently absurd, but if there is an easy way, either through magic or helpful monsters like oozes or giant dung beetles, to remove, destroy or relocate large masses of waste, it may be that cisterns and waste pits are all that's actually needed, with low-level mages or monster tamers acting as gong farmers, a medieval job, a job that was essentially clearing out waste deposits. Personally, the giant dung beetle is such a cool idea that I am going to be incorporating it into some societies in my world, especially as they can create some form of solid biomass or solid fertilizer. But I keep getting distracted from the veins of a massive urban environment, the actual sewers. In those places that do have a big old sewer, how would they be used and how would they be maintained? First of all, it's likely that the people who built the system are also going to be the best at maintaining the system. Not just because they're familiar with it, but for reasons of practicality as well. These groups will know specific techniques used in the construction, but also, crucially, they fit in the tunnels that they built. If you choose to utilise dwarven or goblin labour to build your tunnels, then those tunnels may end up slightly too small for regular folk to move around easily, making them less able to fix cracks and clear blockages. This could well be a bargaining chip by the original constructors to barter for more power, as they're the only ones who can reasonably maintain this massive system that they were perhaps forced into building. Indeed, in one city in my world, goblins have managed to build themselves from indentured forced labourers, building this sewer system into a protected, free and respected class of labourers with a guild and city-wide assent to manage and operate the sewers. Just don't mind the small disaffected revolutionary faction growing within the guild's ranks who hold a bit of a grudge for the way that their ancestors were treated historically, and who seek to use their intimate knowledge of where everyone's toilet is to power a campaign of spycraft and assassinations. But alongside basic repairs, it's also going to be necessary for our maintenance crews to do large-scale works in wet or disease-ridden conditions. If a large crack has opened up in the base of a tunnel underneath the flow of sewage, and therefore this sewage is getting mixed in with groundwater, you've got a real problem. And you've somehow got to get your workers and labourers down to the floor of a flowing pipe to clean up and fix this crack. Modern sewer systems get around this problem by having secondary routes, having diversions and sluices to temporarily cut off certain pipes from others if they really need maintenance. Which is a solid option for our fantasy systems as well, and can create some interesting environmental hazards. If, say, a pipe is closed for maintenance while adventurers are secretly exploring within it. So what if we don't have the foresight or the mechanical ability to make such a change? Well, there is always the option of controlling the water. Water control magic might be our saviour here, although first it is worth knowing whether water controlling magic only works on water or if it works on wastewater mixed in with all the flushings of all the people. Because actually there would be benefits to either being true. If your magic can only control the water in amongst the sewage, well, then you have a fairly effective water treatment situation. Just stick a water bender above a cistern and have them catch some of the fresh water, bringing it to them and leaving the urea and feces behind. Alternatively, if you can control wastewater generally, then I can see a water mage becoming an impromptu plug or diverter of currents, holding back a wall of sewage to keep a specific tunnel dry and safe for workers to patch up cracks. I mean, just imagine a group of workmen going as fast as possible, only for their water mage to get startled by a passing group of vagrant adventurers, releasing his control of the tidal wave of sewage upon everyone. Now that is an environmental hazard. And speaking of hazards, sewers also produce gases, which really can't be allowed to build up. So perhaps a magically eternal flame to burn off gases in a steady and repeatable fashion? Or you could even power some of your street lamps with sewer gas, a genuine Victorian practice used across the UK. They are called stench pipes. Another practical issue for sewer systems is gravity. The simplest way to manage a system like this is to use gravity to draw wastewater to low-lying areas for processing or disposal. Usually you can move past hilly obstacles or things that get in the way of a continuous downward slope in the modern day using pumping stations. Although a historic Archimedes screw or similar system might work as well. I imagine up to a certain viscosity. With magic, or with repeatable, untiring labour, the problem of gravity may be somewhat minimised. Golomancy or necromancy can create untiring automata to perpetually power pumps, and therefore solve issues with elevation. Say you want to collect wastewater from the lowest lying area in a city and dump it in the river across a hill. That's a challenge, but with a perpetually turning gear or some sort of perpetual movement mechanism, that can be done. And these are automata who will continue operating machinery potentially without degradation for centuries. It is perhaps not as efficient as a vacuum pump, but for initial investment and a relatively low tech level, it's a solid choice. Of course, you may even be able to enchant a series of pipes with anti-gravity, which, again, a pretty cool environmental hazard. I want to tackle two more topics to give a broad sense of how versatile sewer systems can be, and how much we're hampering our ideas by sticking with the tropey brick-lined pipes filled with toxic sludge. The first proper topic is storm drains, which I've mentioned a little earlier. Many of those big sewer systems I outlined earlier in the video, the ones big enough to hold a person, exist in the context of complex drainage issues. London, Paris, Rome, all big cities with dense urban sprawl, which also hold big rivers prone to flooding. When you factor in urban density blocking water from just saturating into soil-filled ground around the area, all of this water that falls from the sky and all of the water coming down the river really needs somewhere to go. And if your pipes simply don't have capacity, or they're blocked, that stuff stays in the streets and spreads disease, destroys property and claims lives. In worlds with even more dramatic weather events than ours, like cataclysms, but also with a potentially better capacity for constructing underground spaces using magic or minions, storm drains seem like a no-brainer, really, in places that may be affected by severe flooding. Oftentimes, in modernity, these storm drains are a separate system from sewage. And I would wager that in a fantasy world where underground infrastructure is easier to build and maintain, it's very likely they'd be two separate but loosely connected systems. It's likely that your storm drains are the far better place to set a secret society or feature unhoused populations or refugees than a more traditional sewage system. Partly for hygiene and taste reasons, and partly because maintenance in a storm drain is likely to be less regular than in a higher stress, constantly active system that also has more issues if it goes wrong. People being down in storm drains also has the added consequence of turning flooding or heavy rainfall into a large hazard for this significant underground population, who may be forced onto unsafe streets, forced to abandon their semi-settled underground lifestyle when seasonal heavy rains hit. I am personally a little annoyed at how rarely flooding gets used as a really dangerous essential environmental hazard in favour of eruptions, volcanoes, fires and the like. So this also serves as a reminder to world builders that flooding is a real, omnipresent threat to any society that relies on water, which is most of them. It's a far more real and tangible concern for most living people than a once-in-a-generation seismic event. Lastly, I want to address water purification. Again, touched a little on this earlier. It's by no means a necessity. Heck, water treatment plants weren't used for sewage discharge until the 1860s. And even then it wasn't being purified into drinkable water, just cleaner water to put back into rivers more sensibly. The question for a fantasy world, therefore, is threefold. Is it worth investing in keeping water sources clean? What technologies exist to aid filtration? And finally, does it make sense to purify your sewage all the way into drinkable water? These answers may vary wildly depending on the world, magic, and the monsters featured. But I will say, generally, dirtying water systems is likely to be more consequential in a fantasy world, not just because creatures may be able to sniff out civilization by the waste that it leaves and be interested in following that trail if they're semi-intelligent and monstrous, but also because a river spirit might get very angry at you. Now, of course, this is all variable and all depending on your settings, but in many fantasy worlds there are omnivorous monsters who don't mind eating sewage or sludge, who may actually be crucial if captured in filtering out the horrible bits from the rest of the actual drinkable water. As I mentioned earlier, you could definitely create a separation system if you have mages who can control just the water part of sewage. I mean, D&D style fantasy even has spells which allow for the ritual, repeatable purification of food and drink, which rids affected edible items of all the ill effects like diseases or poisons. Then all you need to do is some basic sort of size filtering or maybe a sand filtration system to remove the chunks. Yeah, probably could have worded them better. And that's the thing. People who make fantastical media don't want to think about this crap because it's not cool, glamorous, or frankly worthwhile enough to spend time reinventing how sewage systems work in a world. To many people it's also a bit gross. It's fair enough. There's often so much to do when world building, so it makes sense to just imagine a sewer system like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and call it a day. What I hope though is that I've been able to challenge some of these assumptions today and demonstrate that sewer systems and cisterns that humans have created can be far more than the dull and disgusting systems that many people think them to be. But that's all we've got time for. I hope you've really enjoyed this video, or at least had some extra thoughts because of it. Please do let me know in the comments if I've jolted anything or if I've got anything wrong about sewer systems. I mean, if you're a professional in this industry, please do let me know. That's fascinating. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.